All right, welcome to the podcast and YouTube because we'll be on both. Today, I want to welcome a dear friend of mine, Miss Keisha Delva. And today we are going to be talking about a lot of big topics that are happening right now. It is 2020. We are in just a global awareness together as a human race, and getting to really take a stand for really what is big on our hearts and minds as leaders and coaches. And I'm so grateful to have Keisha here today to get to dive into these topics and get to hear all of her points of views and education around how we can really stand as leaders and be authentic to ourselves, and also not abandon any of the big topics that can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people to address. So without further ado, Keisha, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and kind of speak to your journey of how you got to where you are today, and what you're up to, and just let us get to know you a little bit more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole. And hello to everyone who's watching and listening. Yes, my name is Keisha Delva. I am currently a soul purpose coach, which is how Nicole and I met because we were in the same coaching community. But my background is in mental health therapy. So prior to becoming a coach for women's empowerment, I was licensed mental health therapist. I still am licensed as a therapist. So a lot of my background comes from working with trauma, working with diverse groups of people, working with people in navigating very difficult situations. And so that's been a blessing for me in my coaching work because it's allowed me to have more depth in terms of where I can go with my clients and things like that. And with everything that's happening now, it's also enabled me to be able to support more people as more people are kind of waking up to the injustices that have been happening in our country in terms of race, as people are wanting to learn more, educate themselves, learn how to be good ancestors, as Nicole and I were just talking about. So there's a lot going on right now. And I just felt really called to step up and start talking about these things. So my business typically doesn't revolve around social justice, although it's something that I personally have been passionate about for many years. But my business has almost become that in the past couple of weeks because I think there is a deep need in communities in general, not just the entrepreneurial or coaching industries, but people in general are looking for places to go where they can speak to what's happening, where they can feel heard, where they can have like-minded community, where they can talk about taboo topics, right? Because there's not a lot of space for that. So I'm really passionate about, at this time, creating space for people to continue their own work in anti-racism and also have community as they continue that work, because without community and without accountability, this work it's difficult, and it's very unlikely for people to continue this work past the news trends and past it being popular in on social media right now, if there isn't that ongoing community. So that's what I've been working on, creating a space for in my business right now. And so that's why Nicole and I wanted to talk about this, because we know a lot of people have questions around this. Like, how do you show up as a compassionate leader at this time? How do you continue to serve your community that you already had prior to this, while also not neglecting what's happening in the world? So we both thought it would be a good idea to speak on that, because I know a lot of people have a lot of discomfort and uncertainty around how to continue their businesses without being ignorant, right? So
Yeah, and I love that you're saying this too, because right before we started the recording, we were talking about how we're already kind of seeing the trend of people trying to go back to normal, and it's one of those times where, as leaders, even if you're in the coaching industry or just in your personal development for all humans, to not just let this be another, like, once it's out of our immediate news, is something you just go back to normal and forget about. So this is getting to also really open all of our eyes to the fact that this is something that the Black community, as our like Black family on the planet, have been dealing with for a very long time. And so knowing that the resources that we'll probably be talking about for white people versus Black people, or for people of color, can be look very different as well, because for well-meaning white people to come in and want to educate themselves, they might be putting it on other people or Black friends or family to understand, when really they need to be in a container that has accountability and education, to where they can have their human feelings of what's coming up for them, even if it's in white fragility, to be able to process, their own blindnesses or ignorances, or where they might kind of brush up against themselves around, their own beliefs or values around all of this. And so with that being said, knowing that we want to create safe containers for everyone to be able to work through this experience, what are some ways that you would recommend for people to navigate through this, whether that is from a leadership point or just to educate, whether you're white or Black or people of color, because I do feel like it is a little bit different for each around self-education, because there is a lot of internalized racism regardless if you grew up in this country. So there's that too.
So that's a great question. I think, let me start by speaking to, I guess, the white entrepreneurs or white people in the coaching industry, because there's been this ongoing conversation. And even still, even though we're weeks into like what's been happening in the world, there are still people who haven't said anything. There are still people who are afraid to speak out. There are still people who are terrified of getting it wrong. And so they're not saying anything. And, I am someone who, I don't necessarily go with the blanket statement that silence is violence. Like, I know that that's a popular thing. And I do believe there is a space and time for taking time to think about what you're going to say before you say it, for taking time to sit with your emotions before you just show up on social media and just start blasting. I totally get that. But there also comes a time where if you're still silent, there aren't really any excuses for that anymore, right? Because there are just so many different ways to speak to what's happening. And to not say anything at all at this point, I think is violence. It is problematic. So if there's anyone who still hasn't said anything, if you're an entrepreneur, or even if you're not an entrepreneur, but you're just a caring human being who wants to speak on things, now is the time to really give yourself permission to do that. And we have to, and the whole good girl thing that Nicole mentioned, sometimes women are so obsessed with being the good girl and being perfectionists that we abandon our sense of empathy and our sense of humanity in that process. And at this point, it's no longer about saying the right thing or not doing harm, because that's impossible. We're going to do harm. We're human beings. We're not perfect. It's really now about, what kind of a person do you want to be? What kind of a leader do you want to be? And how can you do your best to show up even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't know what to say or how to say it? How can you say something to add your voice to this message so that people know where you stand, so that you yourself know where you stand?
Right.
Like, there's no way to do that without using your voice. And there are a million different ways to use your voice, a million different areas that your voice is needed. So with all of this room and all of this space, we have the power to choose how we're going to show up, where we're going to show up, and what we're going to do to let ourselves and others know where we stand in terms of social justice, where we stand in terms of humanitarian issues. So there's no better time than the present to speak truth. So I always say that. So that's what I would say to the white community. And of course, continue to educate yourself, continue to pay Black people to educate you. Like, I'm a huge fan of using free resources and platforms like Instagram. Like, oh my God, like what a blessing Instagram is in times like these where there are just resources, free resources floating around everywhere, right? But there is something to be said for investing in Black businesses, for paying Black educators, for compensating people for emotional labor and all of these things that we sometimes don't think about because we live in a white supremacist society that conditions us to take advantage of people of color and Black people in ways that we don't always understand as white people. So and educate yourself, invest in your own education, and pay Black people and people of color who are helping to educate you on how to be anti-racist. Um, in terms of Black people and people of color, like, yeah, I mean, I just have so much compassion for Black people and people of color right now because it's such a difficult thing to be in a position where you've been oppressed and then also be in the position to educate your oppressor. And I think that that is so traumatizing.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of space for the pain, the grief, the anger, the emotions of Black people to be held. Like we, you know, I've had a lot of people in the past week, people who love me and know me and people who don't know me that well, but like me from a distance, white people who have tried to approach me and like offer to hold space or offer, you know, support. And it's very much appreciated, especially when it's coming from someone that I know has been doing the work, like Nicole. Like when Nicole says, how can I support you? I trust that I can be emotional with Nicole. And I trust that even though she's not a Black woman, I know she can hold space for me because she's been doing the work to educate herself on how to do that. But there's not a lot of space for our grief and our pain in a white supremacist society, right? So for Black people and people of color, I would say just like, your feelings are valid. Like whatever you're feeling, whenever you're feeling it, however you want to express it, that's valid. And to just go where you can heal. I think that's like the most important thing. Like go where you feel safe to heal. And also give yourself permission to not continue to subscribe to or follow white leadership that hasn't shown up for you, that hasn't created space for you, that hasn't shown you that they value your emotions or they value what you're going through, or that they even value your dollars, right? Because they're just not showing up for you in the way that you need. It's okay to give yourself permission to cut ties. And that in and of itself is painful, right? Because sometimes these are relationships that we've had for years, or we've been following certain leaders and then we expected so much from them and they didn't show up, and that's painful. So I think just for Black people and people of color, like you're doing amazing. Take care of yourself, give yourself what you need. Don't judge yourself for how you're showing up right now, especially if you're an entrepreneur who's like hasn't had any time to process or grieve, but you're still expected to show up for a business. It's a lot. And I think just giving ourselves permission to take things one day at a time, to feel what we feel, and go from there. I mean, yeah, that's just what's coming to mind off the top of my head. But there's obviously just so much, like there's just so much happening. And I know there's not always, you don't always know where to go to express yourself. But I love that we're having a lot of Black leadership stepping up right now and like really being shining examples for people of where they can go to feel safe. And I just love that so much. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And to add to that, I really do feel like it's important for, as you were saying, for Black women especially, to find safe spaces to get to grieve and process all of this. And I know, and I'll listen when I post these out too, on YouTube resources. And Keisha, I know you're a resource for this as well. But really finding a place for Black women to be in all Black community with someone, an educator and someone that can help them process around like the anti-racism that they've like internalized and had to deal with for centuries. That's like the, you know, generational trauma and pain, and it's really important to have that sacred space where there isn't a white person trying to like hold this space, because it's well-meaning and I'm sure there could be some healing there, but it's also like getting to have that really sacred container of where it's just all Black women. And same thing for some of the white coaches or white people that want to have a container where they're like, can go and be in their whiteness and have a coach and an educator guide them through that and let them have tiers in a space where it's not going to impose their own realizations and different things coming up for them onto Black people, that they're like, we got our own own grief and things happening. So really getting to find those educators in those spaces, to where it can be just so much healing can happen and so much education around us getting to be in community and to create communities where these conversations can happen and where that healing can take place.
Wow.
And it's so important and so necessary. So just like adding into what you were saying on that as well.
Yeah, it's so important and so necessary. And, you know, it's, I don't want to, we can't gloss over how heavy all of this is. Like, you know, when you really, which I guess is what privilege does, it protects you from pain. It protects you from being inconvenienced. It protects you from having to think about certain things. And, you know, a lot is coming up emotionally right now. And that goes back to the whole, my discomfort with going back to business as usual, because when we go back to business as usual, we continue to ignore pain, we continue to ignore suffering, and when we do that, we only perpetuate it. So regardless of who you are right now or what color you are right now, it's perfectly normal and healthy to be feeling a lot grief, rage, confusion, feeling numb, feeling lost. And that's something that's also not always spoken about, because when we're feeling uncomfortable, we just want to get past it. Like, okay, let this be over. I'm done feeling like crap now. I want to move on. And we're really being called to learn how to hold space for both. Like, how do you sit with your pain? How do you sit with the atrocities of social injustice and still take care of yourself and still show up as a leader and still do all the things that you have to do every day to maintain a business? So I think self-care has to be part of this conversation too, for everyone. White, color, a Black person, we're all deeply in need of self-care, and giving ourselves permission to do that is really important right now.
Yeah, and I love that I had saw a post that you put out where it was you in like a silly fun picture and you're like, this is me and my joy. And it's getting to like have the full spectrum of human experience, to where like you're like, yeah, I get to be righteously raging right now about the injustices of my people, and I also still get to feel joy, and I still get to like live my life and know that I'm doing everything that I can to show up. And that's where this just like going back to business as usual, it's like it's it's never how it works, you know. It's just like it just can't. Like, I know that people want to get back to the comfort zones, but I really see this time as like, you know, people, you'll see all the like memes right now of people like, oh, let's like refresh or restart 2020 or just like delete 2020. I'm like, this is one of the most profound years that I've experienced in my entire life around, as a collective, us getting to crack open to the shadow work and to the core wounds of us as humans and get to start the healing process. And it's not quick, it's not easy, it's not overnight. It's this really, really shadow work that we're doing as a collective. And I just know from, you know, working with Martha Beck and my own healing processes that like, as much as we want to just like have it go back to normal, it's like, this is such a beautiful opportunity for healing in so many ways, and for people just to wake up to what is actually going on around them.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, what you're saying really speaks to this tendency that we can see in the spiritual community to spiritually bypass, right? And just like love and light all over it. And I don't see color, and, you know, and all of these things. And it's like that goes against actual spirituality, because spirituality is not just all love and light and what feels good and how can we move past the darkness as quickly as possible. It's about, like you said, that shadow work. How can we actually integrate our shadows? Because our shadows need to be acknowledged and seen and felt. They don't, you know, we can't just continue to ignore that. And that's what we as a society have been doing. We've been ignoring the pain and suffering of different groups of people. And we cannot progress in our spirituality, in our humanity, in our evolution without confronting these things.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I'm excited personally to see the spiritual industry or space like evolving from this, and people waking up to the fact that like, oh wait, where are the Black spiritual teachers and leaders? Like why are all of the accounts I follow on Instagram just white people doing yoga? Like where are the people
Yeah.
color and the Black people who are in these spaces? Where are these voices? So like there's just so much richness there for people who are open to it and people who want to move forward as a more diverse collective. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about that. As hard as it is and as sticky and painful as it is, there's just so much growth happening right now, and so it's been needed for so long. And it's like, and that's what I want people to embrace as well. It's like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel great, but like, look at what's coming out of this. Like, look at justice being served in ways we haven't seen before. Look at people working together to make change happen. It's like, that's the beauty of the human spirit, and we're seeing it now. And the more we try to gloss over it, we're only crushing that. Why would we want to? We don't want to crush that. We want to give it space to continue to flourish.
Absolutely. And yeah, it makes me think of this. I can't remember if I was reading it in one of the books or it was in the communities that I'm in, but they were talking about this rehumanizing process. And I think for a lot of white people specifically, but like for a lot of people in American culture, there's been the like white supremacy, white fragility, and the spiritual bypassing to where it's like people have been rationalizing or even just completely oblivious and ignorant to things that are going on. But this, everything that's happening right now is us rehumanizing. It is us actually feeling. It is us like having that human experience where it's not just like everything's rainbows and magical all the time, and like even though people are getting killed for the color of their skin, it's like, what the fuck? Like, let's pause here for a moment and actually take a look around. And yeah, and so in your experience as far as like integrating in this like social justice and how to speak to that for the coaches and for anyone really, because this is, you know, like, how do you have these conversations with relatives that maybe aren't open to thinking or even really getting on board with anything? Because there are those people as well that are just like, all lives matter, and you're just like, oh my God, and you try to explain it to them and they just like, it's that spiritual bypassing, it's the like white privilege, it's all of the like indoctrinated things. So like as a coach or as someone, you know, maybe like white women that are trying to speak to their communities or families so that people maybe don't get what they're trying to say, you know, obviously it's like not worrying about it being perfect and getting to speak up and say something, but also I guess just what you would recommend or what you've been doing to integrate in the social justice piece so that people who see you know your values, they know that this is something you stand for, and also saying it in ways, you know, that you know that you're going to piss some people off, but then not taking it personally when people attack you or have different opinions. That's something I've noticed is I've had people like have their opinions, and that's great, and I'm not trying to like muscle anybody out of like their voice, but I'm also like, and I don't need to agree with you, or that kind of a thing. So I'd love to hear like your thoughts on, you know, how you're integrating or have been integrating this in your business, or just for anyone who may be scared to speak up or doesn't know what to say.
Sure. So, oh my goodness, there's so much we can talk about in this area, but yeah. It's really important. We also, even in our activism, even in our educating of other people, we also have a right to our own boundaries. I don't encourage anyone to continue to go back to their racist uncle and try to have the same conversation over and over and over again with someone who doesn't get it who doesn't want to get it, right? There's a difference between someone who's just like, all lives matter, I'm blind, I don't care, blah, 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 versus someone who's like, but I don't get it. Why is it wrong if I say that? Like, so there's a different, you can tell when someone's curious and open to a conversation. And the people who are just so entrenched in their racism and don't want to change, don't want to have a conversation, I don't know that these are the people that need our energy and attention.
Right.
There are people who are, I mean, I hate to say in the middle, because I don't even know, how could you be in the middle? But there are people who are more open-minded, who maybe their privilege has blinded them to certain things, but they're willing to learn. And I think those are the people that we really need to be directing our energy to. And I saw a quote about this morning that I loved. It's like, let's marginalize the hardcore racists, right? Like the same way the hardcore racists have marginalized and disenfranchised Black people and people of color, they need to be marginalized. They need to understand what it feels like to be ignored and overlooked and not listened to. And sometimes I feel like the more attention and energy we focus on trying to change these people who don't want to change, all we're doing is inflating their ego and making them think that they're important, right?
Yeah.
So I would say, be mindful of who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, and what you're hoping to accomplish from that. And be wise about how you're spending your time and energy. Because time and energy are the most precious resources any of us have. And I personally don't want to spend my time and energy arguing with a racist who doesn't care. I'd rather have a conversation with either, if you're a white person, have a conversation with a Black leader, have a conversation that helps to amplify the voices of Black people and people of color in your community. That to me is time better spent, right? So that's part of it. And then also, in terms of how you're communicating what you're communicating, I also say defer to Black voices. Like if there's something you don't know how to say, I guarantee you a Black woman has already said it a million times better. You don't have to try to reinvent the wheel. You can repost, you can give credit, you can say, oh, I was inspired by this message that I heard from this, and I just want to expand upon it in my own way. There are just a million different ways that you can do that. I think we can sometimes put pressure on ourselves to think like, oh my gosh, how am I going to communicate this? But like, it's not as hard as we sometimes make it out to be. Like, are you coming from the heart? Are you including Black leadership in these conversations? Are you amplifying Black voices? Like, if you're doing that, you'll notice that a lot of the work that you're starting to do is not as hard as you think it is.
Right.
So yeah, like where can you put your energy and time in a way that's really going to help to uplift the Black community versus like doing things that aren't going to really change that much. And I like to say, ask yourself, how can you be useful to the Black community? Like, ask yourself, is what I'm doing useful to the Black community, or is it me centering myself? Is what I'm doing useful to the Black community, or am I spending my time unwisely? So just like ask yourself, am I being useful? And if not, how can I be useful?
Oh, I love that. Can you speak more around white centering? Because I know that's something that I think is where most people have a blind spot around, where, and myself included, where I'm like, oh, fuck, I did that again. Or like, just if you could speak more to that, that would be awesome.
I do. I speak about this too. It's like, I know white people, white women want so badly to do the opposite, and sometimes they end up doing harm by trying to avoid doing harm. So you can know that you're centering yourself if you're focused on you and your own feelings, right? Which isn't a bad thing. I think we need to hear white voices. We need to hear white people's experiences with racism and white privilege and all of that. But is it being done in a way where you're trying to get empathy and validation from other people? Because if that's what you're hoping for, and you can tell by the feedback you get too. Like if people are just like, oh my gosh, that's great, I'm so proud of you, but then the conversation never actually gets around to what are we doing for Black people? Like if the conversation never comes around to that, then that's an indicator that you're centering yourself. If the comments are filled with people like congratulating you for doing what you already should have been doing anyway, that's kind of how you know you're centering yourself instead of including Black people. If you're not reaching out to Black people to collaborate with them, if you're not reaching out to Black people to amplify their voices on your platform, if you're not paying Black people for the collaborations and work that they're doing, you're probably centering yourself. So just ask, what is my intention here? And is what I'm saying and creating meeting that intention as effectively as it could be? How can I, even if I think I'm already amplifying Black voices, how can I take it even further? How can I get outside of my comfort zone when it comes to how I'm showing up for the Black community? Because even people who are further along in their journey of anti-racism, who've like gone to the workshops and worked with Black leaders and done all the things, there's still a level of comfort that we all like to sit in. We like to sit and stay where it's comfortable. So ask yourself, how can I challenge myself to show up even more for the Black community? What would that even look like?
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's back to this like rehumanizing. It's like getting to this like, and I love how powerful it is for you saying like the intention. Like, what is it exactly? Like, are you just like floodgating, like posting, sharing these things, or are you like really intentional and like what is the purpose around that? And and just getting to like collaborate in a way that's like not self-promoting. And I think that's like a hard thing for, and I know we've been taught in some of our coaching where it's just like kind of all about me, and I get to like be the Nicole show and like be on the stage, when really it's like that's not sustainable, I don't feel like in the long term. And it's also it's so superficial in so many ways around like there's so much more work to be done in being better ancestors. So yeah.
Yes, and I think we're starting to see this shift happening of like the influencer of like, it's all about me and look how cool I am and like look at my glamorous lifestyle and how much money I make. And people are getting really bored of that, and people want to know, okay, how can we transition it from it's all about me to it's all about we? You know, like, and our as leaders who are white, also asking yourself like, what would a Black person or a person of color think about my business? Like, how does it look to them? Like, what's their perspective? And I don't even know if a lot of white leaders have even thought to even ask their audience, their people in their audience who are Black or people of color, like, what do you think? What do you need? What are your unique challenges? A lot of people have never even thought to ask that, right? So there's so much opportunity here for those who are willing to take it to learn more about how to serve their community, and not just that's a segment of their community.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really, it's just this like human is just like being human, and like and getting rid of just all the conditions and the bullshit, and like and just reaching out to people and connecting around like, I see you, like I like absolutely need you as a part of my like community and my humanness in my life. And it's thank you for touching on that, because it's I think been overlooked, and it's getting highlighted in a lot of ways. We're seeing a lot of coaches, white coaches, come out and owning really owning that they have completely overlooked a lot of this. So it's so important.
What you just said, Nicole, was so beautiful, like saying, I need you. Like, I think that statement, you know how like when people are like, well, I don't know what to say, how do I say? Sometimes it's just the simplest things.
Yeah.
I see you, I need you, you're important to me, your feelings matter. Like, people make it so complicated, but when you get back to like what you said, the rehumanization of it, the feeling, where are the feelings? What are you feeling? Like, you don't have to have some perfectly curated statement. Like, how do you feel? And what do you want your community to know about what you feel? That's it. Like, I'm hurt that I hurt you. I'm sorry. Like, it's not that hard. Right.
Yeah.
Hard.
Yeah. I just love this. I love talking to you. I'm just like, I just love this. Let's see what else. So there's just so many things that we could talk about around all of these conversations.
A lot. It's a
And
lot.
that's where I do feel like, in what you're saying of like when people don't know what to ask, it's like that checking in, like, how is your heart? Like, how are you? Like, I know, like, I think that alone, just an open-ended question, can serve and connect, just the human pieces of us around like owning. And I think as a community, as a culture, have been trained to live up from the neck up. And we have been so in the like grind and just
Yeah.
seeing like things as like your next step forward or whatever. And really, this is, as a culture, as a community, coming back into our bodies and being like, holy shit, like there's so much going on here that
Right.
I've really been opened my eyes to what the Black community and the Black family has just dealt with, the horrors and the things that have been going on for centuries. And it is a heavy topic, and most, like, the bypassing piece where people don't want to look at this. And so it's really getting to hold that space in that container for people to come into these big emotions, and knowing that if you reach out to a friend, that like holding that space for them is also absolutely required if you're going to open that conversation too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see the value in not going back to business as usual. And for anyone that is listening or will be listening to this, around getting to continue with the accountability, and not just like once the news or like what's on Instagram or Facebook fades away. I feel like there's a tendency where if it's not right in front of you all the time, especially for white people, because they don't necessarily live with the fear of police or different things, where it's not top of mind, so to speak, for them in that way. And so finding ways to keep it top of mind, whether it's like a community or ongoing book club, or like something where you can be educating that. And then also for Black people to find those communities where they can be processing the grief of the fact that it's not going to be an overnight, like everyone wakes up tomorrow and there's no racism. Unfortunately, I wish that was the case, but in finding so we're continuing to move forward and to progress and to alchemize our communities. And and I love this conversation so much, of getting to hear your input on this as well. So
And I think too, just to touch on like creating accountability and sustainability, when we're looking at systemic racism, which impacts every aspect of society, it's a lot, right? It's not just healthcare, it's not just education, it's not just the legal system, it's everything. So I think sometimes we can be so overwhelmed by how big the problem is that we're like, I don't even know where to start or what to do, right? So I think that we all have our purpose in these movements, whether it's Black Lives Matter today, whether it's another human rights or social justice issue tomorrow. We have certain passions and interests that are perfectly designed to plug into social justice movements. I think sometimes people think they have to become a different person or to be a protester, an activist now and in the streets. And it's like, no, but what are you passionate about now? Are you passionate about art? Okay, well, maybe you can plug into exposing Black kids to the arts, right? Are you passionate about working with moms? Okay, maybe you can plug into how you can support Black mothers. Like, you can use what you're already passionate about and have your unique contribution to the movement. So I think that's something else that is really important in our businesses. Whatever your business is, you don't even have to change your business. How can you already take what you love and be more inclusive?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, so good. So good. Okay, well, I'm trying to think of some other things where, let me see.
I know it's a lot, right?
Yeah, I'm just like, I feel like we could literally talk about this for hours, for days and days and days. With your podcast, your Soul Purpose podcast,
Mhm.
I know that that's like a really, really great resource for people too, to get to like have that continuous education and like hearing. What are other ways in which people can contact you or work with you or follow you and kind of keep and plug into your community and what you got going on as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Keisha Delva Creative on Instagram. There's a podcast. And I welcome people to just friend me on Facebook. Like I used to have a Facebook business page and then I was like, I don't want to manage this. This is really annoying. So if you want to connect with me, feel free to just send me a friend request to my personal page because I've been talking about this like nonstop for like 3 weeks straight and just like sharing and just being an open channel for people, like for whoever needs to hear what I have to say, and like not restricting myself at all and just allowing the words to come out. Yeah. And also I have currently 2 different ways to work with me or be in a container with me. There's the Liberation Mastermind, which I created for people to have ongoing community support, resources, accountability in our work to collectively dismantle white supremacy. And this is open to all people, all ages, all races, because I personally want to kind of be a bridge for people to feel safe to talk about race. Like we don't, and you mentioned this too, there is a need for spaces where there is just Black only, or spaces maybe it's just white only, so white people are not unintentionally committing violence against Black people and people of color, right? But I also think there needs to be space for us to come together and have these conversations, because if we're only just talking to each other, how are we going to solve the problem, right?
Right.
So this is a space for us to come together collectively, and talk about the hard things and ask each other questions and hear what other people have to say about it and get feedback for what's going on in the world, right? Because it's hard. Like it's hard. Like I mentioned this the other day, being pro-Black and being pro-Black Lives Matter as a white person, uh, it's hard enough as a Black person to be pro-Black, much less a white person to be pro-Black, and all of the stigma and like abuse that comes out of that too. So I just wanted to create a space for everyone to come and be able to share, but then also to be held accountable, because this isn't just going to be something where you get to come and complain about how hard your day was. It's like, well, what are you doing? What are you working on this week? What are your action steps? What are your goals? What impact are you going to make this week, right? So if we don't have somebody asking us that, and Nicole, you know, it's like coaching. It's like that's the whole reason people hire us, because they held accountable and they need someone who's going to ask the hard questions to be like, oh shit, yeah, I need to really address this. So I just wanted to create a space for all of that, and it's a 3-month minimum, and it's open enrollment, so people can jump in whenever. People can there's the option to renew. I just wanted this to just be a space where people know they can come, and it's not just about Black liberation, it's about liberation for all of us from white supremacy, because white supremacy hurts white people. You know, it's not the same as the way it hurts Black people and people of color, but white supremacy hurts white people very badly too, and I don't think that gets talked about enough either.
Right.
White supremacy is not a Black problem, it's a white issue. And white people taking ownership of white supremacy is what's going to be the difference between how long we all have to live with this, right? So that's option 1, the Liberation Mastermind. Option 2 is a 4-week program I created called Unfuckwithable. And this is for women only. And this is for women who want to feel unfuckwithable, like so empowered to show up in your truth, not give a fuck what people think, to not worry so much about pleasing others, just to just be in your power as a woman. And there's like, whether you do Unfuckwithable or whether you do the Liberation Mastermind, both have options if you want to add private sessions with me, since both are group programs. So there's that for those who want to go deeper into their work in whatever way. And then even outside of my programs, people can still work with me one-on-one, just to hire me as a coach and work on whatever you want to work on, spirituality, business, expressing your truth, whatever. So yeah, I'm out here, and I just, my intention here is to just show up and serve from a place of like being true to myself, and also just serving my community. And like I said, there's a way to do that where you're not abandoning who you are. And the Liberation Mastermind is an example of me making a pivot, because I had Unfuckwithable as my program that I was launching, and then this all happened, and I was like, okay, how can I create something that people need right now? Made a pivot, created something I had no intention on ever creating, but here we are. So this is something that we do as entrepreneurs as well. Is like, where is the need, and how can I feel the need?
Absolutely. That's so beautiful. Yeah. For anyone listening, make sure you go get into one of her containers, because Keisha is a badass and a soul sister. So she will get you super aligned and unfuckable with, for sure. It's so fun. Well, all right. Thank you so much, Keisha. This is such a great chat, talking about really big topics. And I know this is going to help so many people. So thank you so much for being on today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you everyone for listening. And I just want to say, don't give up the good fight. Like we were saying earlier, it's so tempting to get tired. It's so tempting to go back to business as usual. It's so tempting to want to be done with it already. But we have to understand, like, we need all hands on deck. We need people to be committed to this. Like that's the only way this is going to go away. Like we can like go back to business as usual for now, and then the same thing's going to happen in a few weeks or months, right? There's no ignoring this. We have to work collectively to dismantle this so that we don't have to keep hearing about these stories, so that we don't have to keep grieving the same senseless, meaningless deaths over and over and over again. This is our opportunity to really show up. This is our opportunity to change history. And it's heavy and it's hard, but it's so fucking exciting. And I just want to plug into that, like the energy of change. This is a big deal, and we all have our part to play. We all have a voice. We all have the ability to make a difference, whether it's huge, whether it's teeny tiny. It all matters. It's all valid. It's all needed. And I'm just so excited for us to continue to communicate with each other and work together to solve this issue, and to like rehumanize ourselves and connect with ourselves. Because I think we're all aching for one another. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, who wants to live in a bubble of everyone that just looks like you and thinks like you? And like, no, like we're not designed for that. We need each other. Yeah. So I just end with that.
Like, preach. So good. It was a great place to end on. So thank you. That was so beautiful.
Pleasure.